Hi, everybody. Good evening. I'm Christy with Tuleyome. We'll probably go ahead and get started. And then if anybody is trying to add, I will just go ahead and admit them. I am Christy. I don't know if you've joined the lectures in the past with Tuleyome, but I'm not Bill. Bill's retired, so I'm taking over for him. And the lecture this evening is presented by Ryan Henson. He's the Senior Policy Director for CalWild. If you're not familiar with CalWild, I'm sure Ryan will give us a little intro, but they are kind of famous for protecting and restoring California's wildest landscapes. Ryan has had a part in protecting 3.8 million acres of public lands in California. He's helped get 5 national monuments established, helped expand 3 more, and he's working closely with Tuleyome to increase that number. So Ryan, I will stop my video and mute myself and let you take it away. And if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we can either answer them as Ryan goes along or save them till the end, just kind of depending on how things flow. So take it away, Ryan.
I was just chuckling because the volunteer who helped me figure out my accomplishments joined this this presentation here, Michael. So thank you, Michael, for helping me figure out how many acres I've been involved in protecting. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And again, Ryan Henson, I'm the policy director for CalWild. I don't actually give many public presentations anymore. I do lots of other things about public lands policy, but I don't give a lot of PowerPoints anymore. So, but I'm doing that tonight, and this is a work in progress over the next few years, probably 4 years. The Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management will be engaged in major planning efforts involving millions of acres of federal land in Northwest California. And this PowerPoint is really about that effort. And so you're only the second audience I've spoken to about this topic. So it's all still a work in progress. I guess I've introduced my, oh no, I haven't said like where I live and stuff. Yeah, so, and CalWild was founded in 1976 and in Davis, California, actually. And I assume many of you are affiliated with Tuleyome. So I know Yolo County is near and dear to Tuleyome's heart. So, but founded in Davis, and then it moved to Oakland, where it's based today. However, all of us, starting with COVID, work from home, and I live and work from Shasta County up near Redding, and but I get to work statewide, but I'm based up in Redding. Now, ironically, I spend most of my time working in Southern California, seems like. All right, so, but we have folks all over the state. Oh, and then, you know, interestingly, I grew up in the region that we are going to be talking about tonight. I grew up in Mendocino County. So I grew up in the Northern Coast Range. And so it's very near and dear to my heart. So, all right. Hey, any questions before we get started? Otherwise, I'll share my PowerPoint and get started. Okay, great. Thank you.
I don't see anything in the chat, so.
Oh, thank you for monitoring chat. I do a poor job of multitasking on that. Okay. Yeah, so let's see. Where's that button that makes the slideshow dominate your screen? See, that proves that I don't do a lot of, there we go. Okay, excellent. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about an opportunity for positive action, and that is for you to influence the management of most of Northwest California's public lands. What am I leaving out? I'm leaving out our national parks, and I'll explain why later. Oh, and again, CalWild founded in 1976. The age of disco I was 8 years old at the time, so I was not affiliated with CalWild at the time, though I think I enjoyed disco. So before we get started, what is an acre? In my line of work, we talk a lot about acres. I usually think of an acre, actually the most important statistic I use is that 640 acres, or fact, is that 640 acres equals 1 square mile. Because whenever I say, for example, that there's 15,348,000 acres of protected federal land, federal land protected as wilderness in California, it's a lot more useful to say in parentheses, that's 23,981 square miles. Not that people can relate to that either, but it's still a little bit better. California is 104, though it depends on how you count the water, but California, the most reliable number seems to be 104 million acres. Therefore, it's easy to say that X million acres is like 7 million acres is roughly just a little less than 7% of California. Okay, so that makes it a little more relatable. Oh, and you can have fun with various things, including 1 acre equals 9.3 basketball courts. And the one I've used all my life as a aspiring high school football guy, 1 acre equals 3/4 of a football field. So, all right. So now that I've gotten that out of the way, 46% of California is public land. That includes 15 million acres of Bureau of Land Management land, almost 15% of California, and then 20 million acres of Forest Service land. So about 20% of California, and then 8 million acres of National Park Service land. Those 3 agencies together manage almost 43% of California. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service manages only a little bit, 279,000 acres. So now I'll walk through the colors with you. The traditional color for the Bureau of Land Management on a map is yellow. And so you can see the BLM, Bureau of Land Management lands here in yellow. And the ones we're going to talk about tonight range from here in Butte County all the way over to Humboldt, Del Norte, and Mendocino and Lake. So, and then the Forest Service lands traditionally are shown as light green here, and the ones we're going to talk about tonight are here in Northwest California. And sadly, we will not talk about our wonderful national parks tonight for reasons I'll explain later. And you can see, interestingly, the state only has 3 million acres. That's because in the 19th century, the state sold most of its land for pennies on the dollar, just to make an immediate profit. Okay, so the U.S. Forest Service is part of the United States Department of Agriculture, unfortunately, and I won't give you the history of why I say unfortunately, but it is in the Department of Agriculture, which means that it's overseen by the Secretary of Agriculture, who's a member of the President's cabinet. Okay, and but the person who gets to run the Forest Service on the day-to-day level is the chief of the Forest Service. This is Chief Moore here. He spent 14 years running the National Forests of California before going to become chief of the Forest Service less than a year ago. And the current head of the Forest Service in California, our regional forester is her title, is Jen Eberline. She insists on being called Jen, as I learned in an email just the other day. And so, yeah, Jen Eberline is our regional forester. And they're both very friendly and accessible people. And again, the Forest Service manages 20 million acres here in California. Believe it or not, this is the best map I could find on a few hours' notice of the National Forests of Northern California. And that's just awful, but oh well, this is going to have to suffice for tonight. So the National Forests we're going to talk about tonight are in Northwest California, and that includes the Mendocino National Forest, my favorite, because I grew up next to it, which is 913,000 acres, and that's shown here. And then the Six Rivers National Forest, 974,000 acres, which is shown as this long strip here. The largest national forest in California, the Shasta Trinity, 2.2 million acres, is shown here. Of course, they cheated and shoved two national forests together, and that's why the Shasta Trinity is the biggest. It used to be the Trinity here and the Shasta here, but they shoved them together. And then the Klamath National Forest at 1.73 million acres up here in purple. And then there's a little bit of a forest in Oregon, a national forest in Oregon called the Rogue River Siskiyou. 1.7 million acres of that forest up in Oregon. Just a little bit comes into California. So those are the national forests of Northwest. Those are the national forests of Northwest California. And I'm getting a sign that my internet is unstable. I hope everything's okay. Okay, and then let's move on to the Bureau of Land Management real quick. The Bureau of Land Management is part of the Department of the Interior. The current head of the Department of Interior is Secretary Deb Haaland, shown here, first Native American member of the cabinet of the United States. So she oversees the Bureau of Land Management, and I'm sorry, that's one of the agencies under the Department of Interior's Bureau of Land Management, along with the National Park Service. The day-to-day operations of the Bureau of Land Management, though, are overseen by a woman whose name I am forgetting, and but she was just recently appointed, and I believe her first name is Bonnie, and I need to update that. As I said, this is a draft, so please bear with me on little things like that. The folks that I deal with are the folks who run the BLM lands in California, and that is this lovely woman, which is Karen Moritzen. Karen oversees all the Bureau of Land Management lands in California. Okay, so that's 15 million acres of public land. Tonight, though, we're going to talk about the BLM lands of Northwest California, which includes the Arcata Field Office, shown as a #1 here on this map, which is 200,000 acres of public land. And then the Redding Field Office, shown as a #2 here on this map, 250,000 acres of public land, because those field offices will be undergoing plan revisions. So opportunities for you to get involved in their management. And then again, why focus on just the Forest Service and the BLM and not talk about our wonderful national parks or our state lands? Well, the Forest Service and the BLM lands are open to industrial development, industrial exploitation, unlike national parks. And so in addition, there are really, as we've said, important upcoming opportunities for you to get involved in the management of these national forests and BLM lands. And so that's also why we're focusing on them tonight. So, hey, I'm going to take a break for a second and ask if there's any comments or questions at this point.
There's nothing in the chat, but feel free to
Okay.
either put it in there or speak up.
Great. Oh, and I'll take a sip of coffee. Okay. I said I wasn't going to talk about the national parks, but this photo, my friends, is from Redwood National Park, one of my favorite national parks. But and that is a Tule elk, a species of elk that only lives in California. I'm sorry, that's a Roosevelt elk. I apologize. It's one of 3 species of elk that live in California. So why are public lands important? I'm going to talk about that real quick. Just remind you, some of you may already know. Public lands are important sources of water. They are the single largest source of water in California. 47% of the state's water supply flows just from our national forests. We don't even have the statistics for the BLM, though much of the BLM land is pretty arid, but still 47% just from our national forests. And that has an economic value estimated at 9.5 billion annually. I need an explanation as to what a billion is, because I feel that, you know, it's like I talked about an acre. It's just hard to relate, but still, you get it. Very important. Public lands are extremely important to the continued survival of many native plants and wildlife, particularly the one shown at the bottom right here that only lives in one part of the Six Rivers National Forest, the Mount Lassick lupin, and that's the Pacific fisher on the top there. Since 56% of California is private land and open to development, many species of native plants and wildlife depend upon public lands to survive. Many species need public lands as core habitat. That's a Tuleyome on the left. Okay, and that's a burrowing owl, a neat critter that folks in Yolo County might be familiar with. Many species need public lands as core habitat and as connections between areas of core habitat. That's a pronghorn on the left. I grew up calling it a pronghorn antelope, but when I was living in Davis, I was constantly corrected that it was not an antelope, it's just a pronghorn, but it's a really neat critter regardless. And this is a steelhead trout on the right here. So this shows, I talk here about many species need public lands as core habitat and as connections between areas of core habitat. Well, that's pretty abstract. So this shows core habitat here as these bushes, and this is a corridor or a link, a path of habitat between areas of core habitat. And this is kind of the way that animals might move across a particular landscape. They have core areas where they live, and then these linkages. It's hard to use non-technical terms when talking about it, but these habitat paths or corridors between them. So public lands provide those. Public lands are also important for recreation. People use public lands for all sorts of recreation, and I won't read the long list. I even learned a new one the other day, pack boating. Actually, a member of our staff is a avid pack boater. He has a foldable boat, foldable kayak that he brings miles and miles and miles into the backcountry, and he gets into a stream and he floats his way out. Incredible. So, what's nice about particularly Forest Service and BLM lands, particularly appealing to me, and I think a very important feature of public lands, is that they're often affordable, often free. Not necessarily our national parks, but certainly our BLM and Forest Service lands, particularly BLM lands, tend to be quite cheap or free. All this recreation generates a lot of money for our economy, and so public lands are good for our economy and good for jobs. So also public lands preserve scenery, such as Mount Shasta here. And, you know, calling Mount Shasta scenery is sort of like, I don't know, calling the Mona Lisa, you know, I don't know, a painting. I mean, it's a little more, I don't know, whatever, but you know what I'm saying. Scenery is more important than just the word itself, I think implies. Protected landscapes on public lands also protect cultural resources. In this case, by cultural resources, I mean those associated with indigenous people. And we shouldn't just think of like rock art, but you know, there's a long list. The longer I've been in this work and work with tribes, the longer the list grows of important cultural resources that can't be confined to single points on a map, but actually involve entire landscapes and sometimes whole species of animals like the desert bighorn sheep or the salmon of the Klamath River. So yeah, a lot of important cultural resources on our BLM and Forest Service lands, and of course Park Service lands. But and also public lands protect scientific values and opportunities to study science. I was struck just the other day by an important archaeology study in the Cache Creek area that some of you might be familiar with on Bureau of Land Management lands there, where they were trying to date indigenous sites. Of course, all such work is confidential, but you know, some good pure science going on Bureau of Land Management lands. Also, protected landscapes on public lands protect historic resources. Okay, so historic, you know, as in Euro-American. One thing I'm really pleased to be working on right now in Riverside County is an effort to protect World War II sites and artifacts, World War II training sites and artifacts associated with World War II training, such as this altar built by the troops out in the desert. And then, you know, even though old mines and stuff can be pretty damaging, now a lot of them are quite historic. And so trying to protect some of that too. And there's things like that up in Northwest California too. And someday soon I'll change this photo to be more relevant for Northwest California, but the point is still relevant. Here's something underappreciated, is that public lands are important for maintaining dark night skies. Maybe some of you live out in a rural area and the Milky Way is a common thing for you, but for an increasing number of people, it's a it's a natural wonder, and something they never get to see. And when they do get to see it, sometimes, as in the case of some young people, it can be a life-changing event. We're also finding increasingly that the dark night sky is important for many species of wildlife, but we're just learning that, really. Public lands are also very important for mitigating the impacts of climate change. Of course, I show one of my favorite national parks, Lassen Volcanic National Park, even though I said we wouldn't talk about that. But public lands are important nonetheless for mitigating the impacts of climate change. And public lands provide the habitat that plants and wildlife need to move across the landscape in response to climate change. In that, like that diagram I was showing you earlier about how wildlife need to move across the landscape from one habitat area to another. Private lands also provide refuges for species of plants and wildlife that, for whatever reason, can't migrate as the climate changes. This is a vernal pool fairy shrimp. Some of you might be familiar with that if you live in the Central Valley. And then old growth forests and even intact desert soils store countless tons of carbon, and that's important for climate change. And we're really just learning this about desert soils. It's amazing. When you bulldoze desert soils, you release tons of carbon into the atmosphere. Public lands provide places for healing and spiritual renewal. This is a group of disabled veterans that we brought out to enjoy the Inyo National Forest. Again, I got to replace this with a more relevant photo for Northwest California. Okay, and I could take a quick break here and see if there's any questions.
There is a question about pronghorn.
Very good.
Terry asked, where do you see pronghorn in California?
Oh, what a wonderful question. Yeah, so they used to range throughout the entire Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, Northeast California, and much of Southeast California. Today, you can only see them in Colusa County, Glenn County, Modoc County, Lassen County, Siskiyou County, and then Plumas County, and and then Mono and Inyo, and they're being reintroduced to Riverside. They were only driven out of Riverside in the 1920s, and now they're being reintroduced today to Riverside County. So that's the best answer I have.
I grew up in North Dakota, and we grew up calling them pronghorn antelope too.
Okay. Yeah.
And there is, oh, Terry said, wow, thanks. And there's another question. Can you say more about wildlife and the dark night skies?
Well, from what I understand, there are birds, for example, that are thrown off by the lights from high-rise buildings such that they can't migrate around the bright lights. Oh, they actually hit the buildings and die because of the lights, apparently. That kind of thing. We're just sort of learning that, really, and trying to mitigate that, you know. That's a tough one. I'm glad I don't have that line of work, because how do you mitigate that if, you know, but I mean, you could design for the future better, I guess. But it's not my area of expertise, but that's one example of you know, birds. I mean, I don't know if they're using the stars or what, but are there other questions?
That's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, 7:28. Okay. Okay, well, hey, despite their importance, public lands are not always managed in such a way as to protect and restore their biological diversity and other values. So what threatens public lands? So the Forest Service was founded by people who believed that with proper planning, we could generate lumber from our national forests in perpetuity without exhausting them. Okay, this is Gifford Pinchot, the founder of the Forest Service, and the guy who thought it was a good idea to locate it in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, because he sort of viewed trees as corn. But over time, poor logging practices have systematically replaced big trees with small trees and shrubs. Okay, and I'll explain why that's bad. From roughly 1946 to 1994, the Forest Service, with the strong encouragement of and pressure from Congress, overemphasized logging and road building above all other activities in Central and Northern California's national forests. I would say all of California's national forests, but no, there's four national forests in Southern California that don't have trees. Well, they have some trees. They have many trees, actually, but they don't have trees that are desirable by the timber industry. So they don't have logging programs. So that's why I say here, Central and Northern California's national forest. Basically from Bakersfield north is where all the logging on the national forests occurred. From about 1946, right after the war, until a court injunction in 1994. As a result, most of the largest trees, the trees that are the most resistant to fire and of most value to wildlife, have been cut down in California's national forests. And we're in a desperate race to save the remainder. This is one of those. Other threats include, to these BLM and Forest Service public lands, include too many roads. Too many roads, how many roads is too many roads? Well, too many roads, definitely, I think this photo is too many roads. But scientifically, scientists can actually tell you that X number of miles per acre is detrimental to certain species. And so it's like, you know, 1.5 miles per acre, 1.5 miles per, no, I can't remember, but there actually are some pretty good ratios for species like elk. But you know, you can also kind of know it when you see it, like at this photo, that there's too many damn roads. When there's several roads to the same place, that's sort of you know, starting in the same place, that's kind of a problem. So related to that is habitat fragmentation, fancy word for just making it harder for wildlife to move across the landscape because we're chopping that landscape apart. We're severing those linkages, those corridors, those paths across the landscape that I showed earlier on the map by doing things like building barbed wire fences that aren't pronghorn friendly, or clear cutting old growth forest and making it more difficult for species to move through the remaining old growth that's been left around, or building roads such that the Mojave Desert tortoise has to very slowly stumble across the road and not get hit. That's examples of habitat fragmentation. Also, and this is something you could give 3 PowerPoints on, we have been practicing fire management that makes fires worse. We started putting the Native Americans, the indigenous people, told the early US Forest Service staff that they had to manage the land with fire. And the back east and German trained foresters of the US Forest Service rejected that and chose models of forest management developed in Europe, which requires that all fires be put out immediately. There's also pressure from the private timber industry to not let any fires burn on public land. And as a result, by putting out fires for years, we allowed our forests to grow into an extremely unhealthy condition, dominated by small trees and brush. And at the same time, the Forest Service systematically went after the big trees to log them. So we're left with small trees and brush, and we put all the fires out. So now we just make fires worse all the time, and we're getting worse and worse fires as a result. And there are no easy answers, folks. I'm not saying we should stop putting fires out. So, but if only we can go back to the 1890s and listen to the indigenous people. Oh, well. So irresponsible recreation is also a problem on our public lands, such as someone here some jerk who drove through a meadow in a Jeep or something. You shouldn't be doing things like that. You should only be driving on the roads that are open for public use. And so, and littering and all the other things you can imagine are problems with irresponsible recreation. This is particularly a problem today with the massive increase in use of public lands under COVID. I mean, just enormous increase in use. Another big problem for this region and elsewhere in California is trespass marijuana cultivation. You can't grow any crop on federal public lands, even though the Forest Service thinks the trees are corn, but you can't grow any commercial crop on federal public lands. And yet foreign drug cartels are using our public lands to grow marijuana. And they do terrible, terrible, terrible damage to the public lands, leave mountains of garbage behind, terrible toxic materials behind. And what this really is a result of the underfunding of our public lands. There aren't enough rangers out there. There aren't enough law enforcement people. And you've got things like the foreign drug cartels moving in here. And I keep saying foreign drug cartels because these aren't, you shouldn't be confused with the people selling pot at the pot dispensaries. This is serious black market marijuana here, not to be confused with, the legal market. And then one of the greatest threats, industrial scale mining and resource extraction. Including even in parts of Northwest California with periodic gold mine proposals on the Trinity River and things like that. And mining on our public lands are actually regulated by laws that were passed in the 19th century. But they're so popular with industry that it's hard for Congress to reform those laws. And so they're extremely liberal in allowing development on public land. Speaking of which, It's also really easy to develop energy on public land, despite the complaints of industry. The energy industry can file speculative proposals to develop just about anywhere, and the agencies have to take them seriously. That doesn't mean that we oppose energy development on public land. It just means that it should be done in the right places, and not in, Native American sacred sites or other places out in the middle of nowhere. It should be close to power lines, close to roads, things like that. You shouldn't have to build a new city to put up solar panels, basically. And another big problem are existing dams, like the Scott Dam here on the Eel River in the Mendocino National Forest, the only dam on the Eel River. And of course, the never-ending list of proposed new dams that big agriculture wants to foist off on California and for the public to pay for. The problem with dams, if you don't know, they kill our fish. They have destroyed California's fishery, California's salmon and steelhead fishery, basically. You could largely pretty much chalk it up to dams at the end. I know there's a lot of factors that contribute to the near extinction of our salmon and steelhead, but it started with the dams. It didn't start actually with the dams, but the dams, I think, were the worst impact. And then climate change, of course. And we're still learning what this means exactly for our public lands. But climate change is this great overarching threat. And last but not least, insufficient funding to support the proper management of public lands and to allow for equitable, by that I mean fair public access and enjoyment. By fair, I mean, it's not fair to charge $50 a night for camping. That is appalling, okay? So, equitable public access and enjoyment. And so we need to get Congress to cough up more money for our public lands. I'm really pleased to say that this year, for the very first time in my entire career, actually, Congress will pass a budget that will be a real significant increase for the BLM and the Forest Service. It'll probably be just this one year, and then we might get another good budget, and then it'll go down again, probably based on the next election, the results there. But it just feels really good that we're going to get some serious money for our Forest Service and BLM lands coming here soon. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break there and ask, are there any questions?
There's nothing in the chat, but I have a question about desert soil carbon sequestration. I don't know anything about that. Can you guide me where to go to look for something?
Yeah, you should Google that in quotes, like desert soil carbon sequestration, all in quotes, and see what comes up. And I know that what has been explained to me is it has something to do with the, I think they're called little silica in the soil down there, or something. And yeah, so you should check that out.
Great, thank you.
I'm still learning the mechanics of it, but it kind of blew my mind. It was kind of rainforest levels of carbon storage.
Yeah, and it seems fairly new.
Yeah,
newly discovered.
Yeah, it's a new understanding. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah. Well, there's 3 best ways to help public lands, and I'm only going to talk about one of them. And that is, we try to pass laws to protect public lands. We try to get Congress to provide more funding for public lands. And then we also try to get we try to get good long-term management plans developed for our public lands. Every area of public land, every national forest, every Bureau of Land Management field office has to have a plan, a long-term management plan. Each forest, each BLM field office must have its own plan. And these plans are good for 20 or more years. And they direct every aspect of public land management. And if we could convince the agencies to do so, the plans can protect lands and waters for decades. Okay, so what are my organization's goals in these upcoming BLM and Forest Service planning processes? That's the Snow Mountain wilderness there, by the way. We want plans that protect the wildest remaining parts of our public lands from all development. Okay. We want plans that protect the wildest remaining streams on our public lands, such as the upper McLeod River here. We want plans to protect all the remaining large trees as much as possible. Uh-oh, I used that photo twice. See, there's so few big trees left, I got to use the same photo twice. Ba-doom-boom. Oh, well, wait. We want plans to protect all remaining large trees as much as possible, and that promote the restoration of big trees across the landscape. And I use this photo twice. Excellent. We also want fire used as a management tool on a much larger scale. Okay. Yes, we want the feds out there actually lighting fires in the forest, as the Native Americans did and advised them to do in 1890. And to cooperate with tribes and others who are also willing and can get certified to do it. There's a lot of tribal partners willing to come out there to the national forests and other public lands and help burn. And for all tree removal, for all logging on California's Forest Service and BLM land to be about three things: restoring big trees, okay, and yes, you can thin small trees to help accelerate the development of more big trees. So believe it or not, by restoring big trees, there's actually a lot of room for working with the timber industry. Okay, so we want it to be about three things. We want it to be about restoring big trees, about reducing fire risk and severity, and about addressing public safety. So those cases where there are trees hanging right over the campground, right over the road or something, it would make sense to remove that tree. Now, why is reducing fire risk and severity in red? That's because the conservation community, the environmental community, is really split on this issue of whether or not any kind of logging, any kind of tree removal can reduce fire risk or severity. And maybe it's because I'm the son of a logger, or maybe it's because I've seen the results on the ground. I'm actually in the camp of favoring the use of chainsaws where you can, where it would actually help, but very carefully and always sparing the biggest trees. So we also want the Forest Service and BLM to and then there's some folks who feel that you should never use a chainsaw on public land for any reason, basically. And that's a large camp of people. We also want the Forest Service and BLM to reduce existing excessive road density where possible, of course, with public engagement. You don't want to just start closing roads on public land without talking to people. But luckily, there are laws that require the agencies to seek public input and stuff like that. It is actually much harder to remove a road than it ever was to build it in the first place for the timber industry. By the way, this is an effort by the Karuk tribe of Northwest California, working on contract with the Forest Service to remove a road that had been built at public expense, by the way, for the timber industry. And now that the road is no longer used for logging, the Karuk want to reduce the damage it does to the fish habitat. And so this is called putting the road to bed or decommissioning it. And that's what they're trying to do here, to restore this area as though a road had never existed. We need a lot more of this, by the way, a lot more of this kind of work. And then as a side benefit, we want to use the planning processes to build coalitions in support of these public lands that are the subjects of these plans. This is a bridge over the Pacific Crest Trail in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. I'm sorry, there's so much text on this slide, but so public comment periods and public meetings are expected, actually, we think in March for the BLM Arcata Field Office, for the BLM's Redding Field Office, and then also for the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. there will actually be public comment periods coming up very soon where you can influence the management of these public lands. And then next year in 2023, we expect the Forest Service to start the process of revising the Klamath, Mendocino, Shasta, Trinity, Six Rivers National Forest plans. So that is 6.3 million acres in all. Okay, that's 6% of California, and you can help influence the management. Now, in the few minutes I've got left, I want to talk about these public lands a little bit for you, and maybe try to personalize them for you a little bit. These are two bald eagles in the Shasta Trinity National Forest that I saw staring down at the Trinity River, going, "Is there something to eat in there?" At least that's what I thought they were saying. Okay, now let's take a brief tour of the lands that will be covered by these planning efforts. So the BLM's Arcata Field Office has wonderful places like Lax Creek here. Lax Creek is a stream that feeds into Redwood Creek, the Redwood Creek that flows into Redwood National Park downstream. The world's largest trees grow along Redwood Creek, and flooding from upstream clear cutting has caused some of those big trees to fall down over the years. And so the BLM acquired the Lax Creek area to restore it so that downstream Redwood National Park would be better protected from bad forest management. So you have an opportunity to help the BLM shape the future of Lax Creek. What more do they want to do there in addition to, they got some nice mountain bike trails apparently now. The BLM's Arcata Field Office also manages the English Ridge Proposed Wilderness. What's the proposed wilderness? Well, it's an area that groups like Tuleyome or CalWild and others are proposing that Congress protect permanently under the Wilderness Act of 1964, which is the strongest form of protection there is for federal land under federal law. And so the English Ridge Proposed Wilderness is proposed for protection by Senator Alex Padilla and Congressman Jared Huffman. And that land is managed by the Arcata Field Office. And then also it's the Eel River, Wild and Scenic River flows through it. Wild and Scenic River is kind of the wilderness equivalent for rivers. What it means is it's the highest protection available for rivers that are currently wild and free. I know the Eel has a dam on it near its headwaters, but this is below that, and so this is a wild and scenic river. This part of the Eel is permanently protected from all dam construction. That's what's really important about a wild and scenic river protection. Also, the King Range National Conservation Area is in the Arcata Field Office. It's part of California's Lost Coast, if you've ever heard of that. And the Headwaters Forest Reserve, which is the largest area of redwood old growth forest that the Bureau of Land Management manages here in California. And the BLM's Redding Field Office, they're going to be revising their plans. This is the Sacramento River Bend area. This is believe it or not, the Sacramento River. It looks very wild up by Red Bluff, and this is a part that's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. The Clear Creek Greenway is also managed by the Redding BLM. This is where I walk my dog, actually, and so is this. But yeah, managed by the BLM, and very important, both of these areas, for salmon and steelhead trout. Kind of a neat thing, and it's a blurry photo, I'm sorry, but the Redding Field Office also manages something called the Weaverville Community Forest. It's managed cooperatively with folks in Trinity County. It's like a people's forest, and they manage it together according to a plan they developed together with the community, and it's like collaboratively managed, and it's a real success. And nobody has a bad thing to say about it. It's really exciting. The local environmentalists, the local timber people, the BLM, the scientists, everybody's happy. It's really neat, a model of forest management. And the Trinity River Wild and Scenic River. I've explained what a wild and scenic river is, and the Trinity River is one of our most important ones, and it's managed by the Bureau of Land Management's Redding Field Office, or at least this part. Now, this Berryessa System Mountain National Monument was declared by President Obama, but we didn't get a plan, and I don't have time to go into what a national monument is, unfortunately, but it was designated by President Obama, and it still doesn't have a management plan. The BLM will finally launch a management planning effort for that landscape. And some of these important places are and I'm running out of time, so I better speed through. But the Cache Creek Wilderness, I hope some of you are familiar with Cache Creek, very special. The Snow Mountain Wilderness, which I've mentioned. The highest point, of course, not of course, but the highest point in the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. And a place that I really love, the Eel River headwaters. This is a photo after it burned recently, and what pleased me here was the remaining ancient forest on the left side of the photo. The Mendocino National Forest has burned so hard in recent years that there's not a lot of green left, sadly. The Black Butte River, I'm sorry, not all the Mendocino National Forest is in the Berryessa Snow Mountain National Monument. So the Mendocino National Forest will be revising their plan in 2023. And some of the important places there are the Black Butte River, Wild and Scenic River shown here. The Black Butte River watershed is also a proposed wilderness in Senator Padilla's and Congressman Huffman's bill I mentioned earlier. This is the Thomas Creek area over in Glenn and Tehama County. And it is amazing. This is a place called the gun site, where two big rocks come together, and it looks like a gun sight aiming out into the Central Valley beyond. And it's just an amazing place. You know, most of it is, it's one of the most amazing wildflower hikes in California, and often hiked by the Native Plant Society, just west of Chico. And the Yolo Middle Eel Wilderness, my favorite place on planet Earth. And it is also in the Mendocino National Forest. I grew up next to it. That's why I love it. It's got more bears than people, big time. Okay, and then the Six Rivers National Forest, which includes the Smith River National Recreation Area and the Smith River Wild and Scenic River. The Smith is California's longest undammed river. It also has California's healthiest fishery, healthiest in terms of its numbers over time. It's just an amazing stronghold of wild land and important fish habitat. And I really encourage you to go visit the turquoise waters of the Smith River if you haven't ever been there. Very special, up in Del Norte County. And yes, they call it Del Norte, not Del Norte. They get all upset about it. All right, and then the Mad River, which is also in the Six Rivers National Forest. The Six Rivers got its name because of its six rivers, and I've named several of them so far. And a fun camping game, of course, is to name the six rivers of the Six Rivers National Forest. The Mad River is the main drinking water source for the city of Eureka, and also has its headwaters in my favorite place, the Yolo. So very important part of the Six Rivers. And the North Fork of the Eel Wild and Scenic River, where they recently found a human habitation site that pushes back the map, or pushes back the calendar on human habitation in this region. I haven't gotten a confirmation yet on the dates they've come up with, but just a few miles from this spot here, they've been doing some research, and people have been in this landscape for much longer, they thought, apparently, than they thought. And then the Mad River Butte's proposed wilderness in the Six Rivers National Forest. This is also in Congressman Huffman's and Senator Padilla's bill that we're working to pass. And the Klamath National Forest, which of course is got the Klamath River in it, which is a wild and scenic river, and the dams are about to be taken out on the Klamath over the next few years, which is amazing. And I hope will help promote salmon recovery. Oh, the Klamath was, I believe the Sacramento, prior to the coming of Europeans, had the greatest fishery in the state, followed by the Klamath, and then followed by the eel, I think. And so I look forward to the day when the Klamath is as strong as the Sacramento and others. With we'll see what happens with the dam recovery, and then the dam removal, and then also the fairly famous Marble Mountains Wilderness is in the Klamath National Forest, which is passed by the Pacific Crest Trail that runs through there. Just an amazing part of the Klamath Mountains. Wish I could talk more about each of these places, but I'm really running out of time. I'm also talking off the top of my head, which is really dangerous. The Russian wilderness here, I'll just note for you, has the largest number of cone-bearing trees of any place on planet Earth. So the largest number of individual cone-bearing tree species of any distinct place on planet Earth, right here in this spot here, the Russian wilderness. So I think it's 30 some odd species of cone-bearing trees. And then the Klamath National Forest also has this shocker, the Butte Valley National Grassland. Where did this come from? Well, in the Midwest, California has a lot of national grasslands. They're actually part of the National Forest system, but California only has one, and it's part of the Klamath National Forest, the Butte Valley National Grassland. And you know what? It's the only place in this entire slideshow I haven't been to. I gotta go. I wanna know what that's about, Butte Valley National Grassland. I hope they have pronghorn. Okay, and then the Klamath National Forest is also famous for the Siskiyou Wilderness, which is also in the Six Rivers National Forest. But they used to say if Bigfoot lives anywhere, it's in the Siskiyou Wilderness. I'm not a believer in Bigfoot, but this is amazingly wild country, and just one of the most important and diverse places on the planet, especially if you love cone-bearing trees. This is like their cradle of evolution here for some reason. I've talked about Mount Shasta Wilderness, but that's in the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Another amazing part of the Shasta Trinity National Forest is the Mount Eddy proposed wilderness, shown here, which is composed of a special kind of soil that we have here called serpentine soil that is ancient seafloor, and it often leads to the development of unique plant communities. And so there's a lot of that at Mount Eddy here. And I've mentioned the Upper McLeod River. That's another place that a special part of the Shasta Trinity. And you might be familiar with some of the famous falls on the McLeod River. And then, of course, the vast Trinity Alps Wilderness, over 500,000 acres in size, the largest protected wilderness north of Yosemite in California. And we want to make it even bigger. We're trying to add to it under Senator Padilla's and Congressman Huffman's bill. Just a wonderful, glorious, wild, magical place. It almost makes me cry. It's so special. And then I'm used to cry about the Yolo bullies. Why am I crying about the Trinity Alps? Okay, and then the Chinkapin proposed wilderness. This is the largest area of unlogged ancient forest in California outside the national park or wilderness system. So that's the factoid for this. This is, again, the largest area of unlogged ancient forest outside the the protected network of areas, the wilderness areas and parks. So very important wild place that we must protect from logging and other development. And we also want to protect the upper part of the South Fork Trinity River as a wild and scenic river. Right now, only the lower part of the South Fork Trinity River is protected as a wild and scenic river, which makes no sense. Okay, and oh my God, and I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm really about done here. How you can help. Okay, all we want you to do, and this is the Castle Crags Wilderness here in the Shasta Trinity National Forest, all we ask you to do to help is to email comment letters to the BLM and the Forest Service when they're taking public input on these plans. It would also be great if you could attend any virtual or in-person public meetings held by the agencies regarding these planning efforts. You don't have to attend everything, but anything you care to. And then we can provide you with basic talking points, but of course, you should definitely speak your own passion about these public lands as well. And contact me if you want to get involved.
Thank you so much, Ryan. It was really, really nice way to spend my evening.
Well, great. Well, hey, thanks everybody. Appreciate your time. Take care.
Thanks, you too. Bye, everybody.